What's God have for us next? This is an exciting part, right? So one thing that we are at right now is called the 200 barrier. You've seen what our average attendance has been. The 200 barrier in church world, regardless of geographical location or denomination or any of that, is a natural barrier where if you as a church do not push through it, you either slide back to 150 or you push forward to 250. And you ask the question, why is that the case? Thank you for asking, right? Okay, good going back and forth here. We're going to talk about why that is the case. But one thing you need to understand is as a church, if you do not change, you collapse under the weight of growth, right? And this happens at multiple stages in church growth. And we give Charlie Humbard the credit for this phrase that he got somewhere. But what got us here won't get us there. We honor and we celebrate what got us here, but we have to change our methodology sometimes to adapt to what we are going to accomplish and what God's put on our hearts. And so what causes these growth barriers? You asked the question, so I'm going to answer it for you. Lots of times, leadership structures can cause these growth barriers. In a very small church, you have one pastor who can answer the phones, he can preach on a Sunday, he can go do hospital visits, he can take care of the nursery sometimes, he can do a whole bunch of different things as one person in a small church. But as that church grows, he doesn't have enough of him to go around. So then you can have two people. You hire another person and they can do it. But once you get to a certain size, it can't be individuals doing it. It has to be teams of people who accomplish this. And if churches don't make the shift to teams, they collapse under the weight. Another thing is physical space, right? If you look at what's going on in our auditorium right now, you're fairly close to people, but you're spread out a little bit, right? You're not too close. Some of you might be too close. But 80% of your auditorium capacity, when that's filled, everybody feels like they're bumping elbows. And so that becomes an issue. We look at the kids' ministry downstairs. If the kids' ministry groups get too large, just like in schools, it becomes more about herding the kids and making sure they don't get into trouble rather than shepherding them and teaching them about God's word, which is what our goal is. And so those become issues. Parking is usually an issue, but here it's not. Every parking space that you can see looking out here belongs to us. And so parking will never be an issue here, but that's God saying, hey, we've got some room for you to grow here yet. Storage spaces and office spaces. As you can imagine, as you're hiring more staff people and doing more ministries, you need more space for storage. You need more office spaces. And generally speaking, I like to joke that these become synonymous. And if you've seen my office, you know that it's a storage space along with an office space. Our main gathering spaces become limiting. If you were here for our Thrive Group, community Thrive Groups downstairs, we shared a meal together. If 20 more people were here for that, they'd be sitting in the hallways and in the stairwell. So your large gathering spaces just become constrictive with church growth. And the last thing that oftentimes is a barrier is staffing needs. And so as the church grows, you can imagine the needs are growing as well, and your staff people wear more hats and they carry more load, and that load becomes heavier and harder for them to carry. Also, non-staff people take on more responsibilities. Statistic that you've probably heard, 80% of the work being done in a church is done by 20% of its people. And that should be humbling, but it should also be challenging because as you look around and you say 20% of us are carrying 80% of the load, and as that load gets heavier, those people get shorter, and I can't afford for that to happen anymore, right? And so we look at the scope of what's going on and we say, all of these things are good things, growth is a good thing, but when you're carrying too much weight, growth becomes a burden and a problem rather than an opportunity. Right? And so as we look at it, we don't want to say, oh, we have to do one more connection class. We have to do another membership class. Those are great things that we want to push forward with excitement. But when you're carrying too much work, you probably know this at your workplace as well. When you are overwhelmed with work and the boss says, here's one more thing to do, you're like, I can't believe it. That can go on in church world as well. And financial constraints can limit that. Statistics show that the average person that comes for the first time doesn't start believing in the mission of where their church is at and start giving to it until 6 to 9 months after they start attending. So 6 to 9 months from now, we will be well over 250 people, and all of those people who started coming between then and now statistically won't be giving to our church. Those are all real needs that are going on.